The outside of the cell is positively charged thanks to sodium and potassium ions, whilst the inside of the cell is negatively charged due to a great amount of negative proteins and chlorine. The cell is polarized due to the difference in charges between the exterior and interior of the cell, and both ion gates are closed. The sodium-potassium pump prevents equilibrium in the cell. The sodium-potassium pump is activated when 3 sodium ions bind to the pump. ATP is signaled and it binds to the pump as well. ATP loses a phosphate and this releases energy. The pump changes shape and it allows the sodium ions to be released outside of the cell. 2 potassium ions bind to the pump from the outside. The leftover phosphate unbinds from the pump and the pump returns to its original shape, allowing the potassium ions into the cell. The all or none response means that either all of the neurons fire at their full potential or none of them do. This depends on whether the neuron reaches its threshold level. The threshold level is the minimum amount of stimulation required to activate a neuron. You can kind of think of this the same way a gun works. Doesn't matter how hard you pull the trigger, whether you tap it with a feather or hit it with a hammer, the bullet is always going to be traveling at the same speed. During the depolarization phase, potassium gates are closed and sodium gates are open, allowing sodium ions to enter the cell. The polarization of the cell is changed, meaning that the outside of the cell turns negative while the inside of the cell is positive. One depolarized area triggers adjacent sodium gates to follow, kind of like falling dominoes. Now that the neuron has fired, the opposite happens. Sodium gates close and potassium gates open, allowing potassium ions into the cell, re-establishing the initial nature of the charges. The outside of the cell is positively charged and the inside of the cell is negative. Hyperpolarization takes place. Sodium gates are still closed and potassium gates are starting to close, but some of them are still open. This ensures that the action potential moves in one forward direction. Once potassium gates are fully closed, sodium-potassium pumps help to re-establish the polarization within the cell. Now it's time for the refractory period, a short period of time of roughly 0.001 seconds when an action potential can be sent. This is important because it gives the neurons time to recover and to re-establish their polarization.